You're listening to Mind, Body, Home with your host, Sara Ann. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Mind, Body, Home podcast. Today, we're going to explore some common excuses that tend to come up during the decluttering process. And I wanted to touch on these because these excuses really get to the root of not only what comes up during the decluttering process, but why we even hold on to certain things. This really is sort of like the juice, the crux of the Connect with Your Clutter workshop. If you've been following along, you know that I have been doing a decluttering series, and we're looking at the decluttering process, not from strategy and organization. Like, that is not my intent with this series or with the workshop. So I want to be clear on that we are not discussing like how to organize and how to set up your day so that you feel more in control of your clutter. No, this is looking at your clutter through a different lens. This is looking at it through the mind, body, home lens. In part one, I touched on mental clutter and how it shows up for us, not only in our headspace, but also in our living spaces. In part two, we looked at clutter of the body, how it manifests in pain and illness. And last week, for part three, we explored the most common forms of clutter, the ones that we relate to the most because we see it visually, and that is in our homes, how it shows up. The point that I'm trying to drive home here is that regardless of how it's showing up for you, they are all related. And the root of all of that is our emotional well being. Our clutter is a cover up for the emotions that we are afraid to uncover. So we're going to dig so much deeper into that during the workshop. But for now, I really hope that you're enjoying the episodes on this topic. I hope that you're gaining some insight into your own home and things are starting to trickle in for you like, oh, that's sort of interesting. I never thought of it that way. So if you have joined other clutter workshops or have read books on how to manage clutter, I really hope that this is a different experience for you. We're really going to go a lot deeper into this. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I did have to push back the workshop date one day. So it's now happening on April the 4th. It's a Thursday at 11 a.m. Central. If you've already signed up, you will be receiving a Zoom link to register. And be sure to register. I'm going to offer a special bonus for a one-on-one clarity session with me for anyone who signs up for the workshop. That will be a private one-on-one hour-long session with me to help answer any questions you might have as it relates to your own home or your own clutter situation. And if there's anything you want to discuss that has maybe come up for you during the workshop or, during the previous episodes, maybe just listening has inspired some self-inquiry that you wanted to just sort of talk through, this is a great time, an opportunity to have access to me directly for 1 hour. But know that that session is only free to those who register for the workshop. So the link to the workshop is in the show notes. Be sure to go ahead and register. More details will be coming out. I apologize. I think I mentioned in last week's episode that I should have full details sent out by today or, early this week, late last week, but I really underestimated the amount of time it takes to create those pages and make sure that everything is linked and processing correctly. This is the first workshop I've ever hosted. I'm sort of learning as I go, so I ask for your grace, and I'm trying to just leave perfectionism behind and do it at an 85, right? One of my coaching mentors said to me, like, is it an 85? Nothing has to be 100, right? And I'm seeing that with my kids too. They just got their report cards and they're like in the 80s, 90s. Nobody got 100, and it's okay. But for whatever reason, most of us with perfectionism issues, we strive for 100, but it's not necessary. So I'm still buttoning it up. I'm getting it done at an 85 for you. You will have all the information shortly. I do have the Zoom link created. You will receive an email with that link. And again, be sure to register so that you receive the one-to-one clarity call with me for free. So let's jump into today's topic. This past weekend, I did some market research and I simply asked women in particular, what is one thing overwhelming you right now? I wasn't specific on with your home, with your kids, with your job, right? I really generalized it to what is one thing overwhelming you right now? And here were the responses: messy papers, tax season, laundry, traffic and work commute, money, being a mom versus managing the household tasks, time, dinner, being a wife or a caretaker, and just juggling all of it on our own, being a single parent, running a business, the house, a family, finding balance, keeping the house clean, feeling like I'm juggling all of the balls. Okay, so my assumptions about what this research would reveal is that we are all, and I say we, I primarily am speaking for women, we are juggling too much. And we feel like it is our responsibility. And we feel like a failure if we're not keeping up with it all. And, this is really what I'm striving to help people overcome, because I really want to help people, like, just help get them simply through their day with a bit more ease, to have more clarity. This is the community that I want to build because I see myself in every single response that these women gave me, right? One day, maybe it's the messy papers. The next day, maybe it's, taxes on top of trying to get my podcast recorded and get it done in time before the kids get home. Another day, it might be, I'm just feeling like I'm not doing enough. Another day, it might be, there's not enough money. And it's just such a mental load that we are all dealing with. And so doing that research for me was exactly what I needed to know that we are all in this together. We are all struggling together. And if we are struggling together, we can overcome it together. So that is my purpose going forward, is to help women and busy families cut through their overwhelm and their chaos and encourage them to find more peace, find more calm, have the ability to be present at home with their families, because that's really what we're all missing out on. We're missing out on being present with each other. We're busying ourselves with too much. And so you're going to see more of this coming out from me as I start to build the community that I want to be part of. And I'm excited that you're all here to sort of witness the beginning stages of everything, really, that I hope to create in the very near future. And I think a lot of women feel it. It is time to band together and be in community and support. So, where do we even start? How do we begin decluttering our lives, right? Well, we start by finding where we are on the spectrum. We have to meet ourselves where we are. And so, what's the spectrum? For me, the way I think of it is we are on the spectrum somewhere between mind, body, and home. There's either an overwhelm in the mind, you're suffering physically in your body, or your home is just stressing you the hell out. Okay. You might be experiencing all three of those, maybe at different days. That's how I experience it. Different days I'm feeling the chaos of clutter somewhere in my home or in my mind, or my hips are bothering me, right? We all are experiencing it somewhere on that mind, body, home spectrum. It's recognizing where we are on the spectrum. But then to make the shift, it requires two things on your part. And that is a willingness to make time, to make space for you and a practice. Making space requires taking a leap of faith, right? Because we're so afraid that all those balls we're juggling, that they're going to come crashing down. And I challenge you to say, so what? So what if they come crashing down? Ask yourself right now, so what? Because the reality is, this is how fear paralyzes us. It stops us from moving forward, right? Our own minds make up some story about why we can't do something, but we have to be willing to challenge our own minds. So that's requirement number one. Requirement number two is the willingness to be done with your own BS. And what do I mean by this? I mean to stop making excuses and to be so in control of the mind and being aware of when it's up to its fear tactics. That takes a lot of stamina. And that's one thing a lot of people struggle with because they know they need help. Some don't know how to make the change. Some know how to make the change, but they don't have the stamina to keep going. And that's where I was for a long time. And I still struggle in that area too. I don't know if you remember in the very beginning of this year's podcasting, when I changed the name to Mind Body Home, I talked about, what I was inviting in for the new year. And one of them was a deep commitment to my practice. And I've been doing pretty good, but even that sort of goes in waves. To make the transition from where you are to where you want to be, whether it's with your clutter, whether it's with your career, whether it's with your relationships, your health, your financial goals, it doesn't matter what it is. You have to be willing to make space. And you also need to be tired of your own excuses. And that's what we're talking about today, primarily as it relates to our clutter. And that's really a good segue into today's topic. When we've had it with ourselves, when we are just taxed and so over our own BS, we stop making excuses. And you will see excuses in everything. And just remember, you are not your excuses. Your excuses are part of your ego, your fear-based thinking. And it's so subconscious because we're taking action from a part of our minds that we aren't even aware of. So in order to get aware, we have to make space. So those are the two requirements. Here are the excuses that commonly come up during a decluttering process. I'm going to start with a popular one because we all have been there, and that's keeping gifts from other people. You might like the item, but you don't really have space for it. If that's the case, you need to prioritize what is important to keep, what is not important to keep. The other common thread to this is maybe you don't like the gift, but you feel guilty getting rid of it. Here is the kicker. Not wanting to hurt someone else's feelings is only a cover-up for experiencing your own feelings about it. And that feeling is guilt. And this is really true for any feeling we have that we aren't aware of. We project our feelings onto other people all the time just to keep ourselves safe from feeling negative emotions. This is the root to everything. This is the whole message of my upcoming workshop. And instead of connect with your clutter, I could literally call it connect with your emotions. The two words are interchangeable. Your clutter is a cover-up of your emotions. So keeping gifts simply out of guilt. And think about it. Think about gifts you've given to other people. Do you really pay attention to if they've used it, how they use it? Do they display it? No. Most of us give it and forget about it, right? Like nobody is really paying as much attention to us as we think they are, number one. And number two, receiving is so much harder because our struggle as women, especially to receive, is harder because it brings up feelings of how we measure our own self-worth. Things might come up again unconsciously. If I get rid of this gift, so-and-so might think I'm a horrible person or an ungrateful friend, or I'm just so incredibly selfish, right? Think about it. It's not like we actually say this to ourselves, but unconsciously, this is what it triggers, is feelings of ungratefulness, selfishness. So if this excuse is coming up, if you're holding on to things because they were gifts, I want you to challenge the story around why you're keeping things that were gifted to you. This goes for gifts. This also goes for inherited items from the family. Don't be your family's emotional dumping ground, right? Because they're passing it on to you because they feel guilty getting rid of it. So if someone in the family has it, then I don't feel as bad about getting rid of it. And that ties in to saving things for your kids someday, right? It's kind of the same thing. It's another excuse. Oh, I'm going to keep this maybe for the kids. Maybe they'll want it, right? And it's really interesting. This is a common excuse, but I'm sort of the opposite when it comes to this. I'm always trying to convince my family to get rid of things. Um, I make them really question it. But it's important to give them autonomy. Whether your kids are small or whether they're grown, ask them, is this something you want? If it's yours or it's, your grandmother's, there are meaningful things that we want to keep. That is true. But be realistic, right? Do we need to keep all of grandma's items? Probably not. Do you think grandma wants you to store all of her items? Probably not, because a lot of grandma's things were important to her. And it's okay if they don't have that same meaning for you. So think about passing things down, because if you are asking your children or even I feel like children or other family members, I really feel like that could be interchangeable. If you're asking other people if they want an item and they say no, then that's okay. But if you're still uneasy about their decision, right? Like you're trying to convince them to take it, or you just don't feel right still getting rid of it, there's an emotional attachment or a sticking point for you, right? So ask yourself, why am I clinging to this item? Why is this so hard for me to let this go? There's something from your past that's keeping you from letting it go. And question if you're using your children or another family member as an excuse. Again, this isn't for everything. This is for items that just sort of seem to be playing a tug of war in your mind. Another common excuse is it might be worth a lot of money. Generally speaking, we overvalue our things. And a really great story, real quick, that I have on this is when we sold our last home in Pittsburgh. I had put up, for the first time ever in my own home, custom window treatments. And for me, that was really a proud moment. One, because as a decorator who was not professionally trained, like I don't have a degree in interior design, I learned everything as I went along. And I learned a lot by implementing things in my own home. And measuring and installing and learning about window treatments is a huge, heavy lift. Like there's a reason why some decorators are strictly window treatment designers, because there's a lot to it. And all my designers out there listening can totally relate to what I'm talking about. And so when it came time to sell my house, I was really adamant about not including the custom drapery in the listing price. My realtor, she was kind of like taken aback. She was like, well, they're affixed to the wall. Generally speaking, they stay with the house. And I thought, I don't know. I can't even, it's so funny because I've come to the realization of why I was so clinging to them. But it was also like in my own mind, I was making up this story about my own self-worth. Like I learned how to measure and install window treatments. I'm proud of myself for that. And this is the first time I've ever put custom drapery in my own home. Like that's an expense that I could never afford that before. The drapery represented a part of me that was proud. I was letting pride get in the way. It represented a part of me who was feeling maybe a little sense of lack, like I didn't want to let them go because they were such an investment that I was afraid to let them go. And playing the tape back, it really sounds silly, but this is a great example of how our mind plays tricks on us. It wants us to believe some story that we don't have to cling to. And so, just to finish the story, in the end, I did end up gifting the drapery to the clients. Like, it was a deal, guys. Like, I had my realtor, like, it was not included in the listing. There was a special clause in there. Like, it was a sticking point. My husband thought I was insane. He was like, there's no way we're hanging these in the new house. Like, they're not going to fit. All the windows are much bigger. You've seen that. The houses are different. And I was just so hung up on it. But in the end, I ended up leaving them with the house. And I can tell you, they have no purpose in my current home or the home we're moving into in a few weeks. So it's just a great example of how we cling to things. And that's what I mean when I say clutter. It's not just clutter in the sense of, messy papers and magazines and post-it notes all over the place. It doesn't always reveal itself in that way. It can reveal itself in any object that keeps us stuck. Another excuse I want you to think about is you might need it someday or you think you'll get it fixed. And these two sort of go hand in hand and are probably the most common excuses. But the just in case excuse is typically used when we have a scarcity mindset over one that is more of abundance. And this can arise from those who have maybe experienced a previous financial hardship or had maybe been forced to let go of things that they highly valued. And along those same lines, there's also this subconscious block, passed down through generations. For example, if you've had a grandparent or even your parents from the Depression era, right? Being forced to ration and hold on to what you have because you might not have access to it tomorrow. That plays a huge role in our societal subconscious. So if you find yourself saying just in case, again, question or challenge yourself, remember to say, so what? So what if you get rid of that thing? What's the worst case scenario? You have to go buy it? Is the thing that's only used a few times a year? Could you potentially borrow it from a family member or a neighbor? With apps like Nextdoor and Facebook groups, there's so much more community support for household items and services. So get really honest with yourself about your just in case items. And the same goes for getting things fixed. If you haven't fixed it in the last 6 months or a year, chances are you're not going to. Because if it was something that was useful, you would have probably fixed it by now. The next excuse I have for you is you don't want to add to landfills. Oof, this is a good one. And I actually struggle with calling it an excuse because who doesn't want to be more, conscious of how we contribute to our planet, right? Because it's a real issue. But I want you to consider the concept of your own home becoming a landfill, right? This isn't helpful either. So again, we are avoiding feelings of guilt or how we value our self-worth. What kind of person am I if I'm not considerate of the planet? Or I bought this, I never used it, or I never wore it. I'm so wasteful, right? These are all the stories that the ego creates in the mind because it thinks its job is to keep us safe from experiencing negative emotions like guilt or shame. So if this is an excuse you find you are using and you are truly considerate of how you dispose items, do your research. Find the organizations that are going to help you properly dispose your items via, recycling, repurposing, reusing. I guarantee you every city or community has a resource that can assist. Maybe your first step is reaching out to a professional organizer, right? They're going to have the right resources. They're going to take some of the load off. I did an episode with a friend of mine, Galia Guri of Valley Bosta. She is legit a superhero when it comes to this very topic. The work she does with her clients in clearing out their spaces, it's such a big lift. So if you're looking for some more inspiration on this particular excuse, you can check out my conversation with her in a previous episode. I'll link to it in the show notes. And lastly is the excuse of it's my partner's stuff or my spouse. Oh, this is a common excuse for really anyone living in the home. It could be your partner, your spouse, or your children. My best advice is to set the example in your own home. I already talked about how we project onto others. And so this is another sneaky little way that the ego attempts to avoid, right? It's someone else's fault. It's someone else is to blame for why I'm overwhelmed by clutter or overwhelmed by XYZ. It doesn't matter what the topic is, right? We can feel overwhelmed by our clutter. We can feel overwhelmed at our work. We can feel overwhelmed by our finances. And every time we feel that sense of overwhelm or chaos, we look outside. We look at others, we look at other situations, and we find reasons to prove our mind right. This is what happens. This is such a big life lesson, you guys. When you understand that you project, you're looking for excuses to avoid feeling your own shame, your own guilt, your own self-worth. And I think as soon as we start recognizing that, that is when we start looking inward and we start doing the work. So if you have that realization, you're ready for this process. There's a famous line from Abraham Hicks. She says, "Words don't teach, life experience does." So if you're asking your kids or your spouse to be more mindful of their clutter, I can guarantee you it's just annoying them and probably making them resentful and spiteful and maybe doing it a little on purpose because that's also the way of the ego. So just tend to your own clutter. Be the example in your own home because you setting that example becomes your energetic output, right? And it's just natural that whatever you send out returns to you. You'll start noticing other people in the house wanting to also maintain a clutter-free environment. So I hope you see that the common thread between all of these excuses is the tendency to avoid our own feelings. The most common emotion that gets triggered here is guilt, and we want to avoid feeling it at all costs. This is all happening primarily at a subconscious level. There does come a time where we start realizing it consciously, but we aren't really aware that our mind is simply playing tricks on us and it's making up stories for us. So it takes intention and a mental fierceness to begin and follow through on the decluttering journey. And I stand by what I say, and that's that the clutter in our home is rooted in mental and emotional clutter as well. It's all connected, my friends. Like, we can get to the root of our clutter, but it does take those two things I mentioned earlier. It takes devotion to creating space with time, creating space in the home. It also takes you being tired of your own BS. If living the way you have been living in a state of overwhelm, in a state of chaos, you're unable to keep up. If you're tired of living that way, it's time to try something new. And your ego is going to tell you you can't do it. You don't have time. You don't have the stamina. You're not ready to face your feelings. It's safe to stay busy, so we don't have to do this. You have to be ready to commit, and that's what it's going to take to flip the script. So I hope to see you at the workshop. Let me know which of these excuses comes up for you, if they come up often, or if you have used maybe a little of everything. We all have. There's no shame in that. Let me know. Send me a DM on Facebook or Instagram. You can email me too. Contact info is always available in the show notes. Again, I hope to see you in the Clutter Workshop happening April 4th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to dig into mind, body, home clutter. We're going to dig into these common excuses. We're going to put it all together. And I really think that this one has some unique insights that I think you're going to find really valuable. So I hope to see you there. And don't forget, anyone who registers for the live workshop will receive a one-on-one clarity session with me to see where you're at and see what resources you need to get you going in the right direction. So I look forward to meeting all of you. If anyone you know is struggling with clutter or just life and home chaos and overwhelm, send them a link to this episode and let them know about the workshop. I'd love to get as many women in there as possible to start building that sense of community. This is something we could all really support each other on. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what it creates. Also, if you're loving this podcast, you can support me by subscribing, writing a review, or simply sharing it with others. For home and life coaching services, please head to my website, jadescottdesign.com. I look forward to connecting with you next week. Until then, much love and gratitude. Thank you so much for listening. This episode is brought to you by Jade Scott Design. Jade Scott Design houses a collection of services, products, and content that are aimed to support mind, body, and home. If you're interested in exploring your relationship to home on a deeper level, be sure to check out our website. Offerings include our signature Elemental Interiors decorating services, as well as mind, body, home alignment sessions. In addition, be sure to also take a look at our home decor line, Shop Elemental. All of this and information on the Mind, Body, Home podcast can be found at jadescottdesign.com.